Good morning. This is Dr. Hansa Das, and I welcome you to my channel History with Hansa. In the series on economic history of India, we've done a number of videos on how the colonial rule exploited Indian economy. In that process, today we are going to discuss about a very important feature of colonial exploitation, which is drain of wealth. How wealth was being drained out of India, and the Britishers were exploiting India, or the Britishers were managing their own interests at the cost of the Indian economy. So today we will talk in detail about the drain of wealth in colonial India. Drain of wealth was the most important cause of the poverty of India. Economic drain was an integral feature of the administrative and economic policy of English East India Company. So the manner in which the English East India Company was exploiting India and was draining the wealth of India was an important reason for the poverty of India. Colonial government was using India's resources, revenue, agriculture, and industry not for the development of India but for British utilization. So, this was one impact of colonization or colonialism, that since India was a colony of the British, so whatever the British were doing in India was not for the development of the Indian economy but for extracting the most out of the Indian economy for the betterment of their own. Drain of wealth was an indirect tribute which the British were extracting from India year after year. Year after year, they went on exploiting the Indian economy. They went on draining the resources, the revenue of India, the wealth of India to their own country. Let us talk about the background of the drain of wealth. Economic drain means that because of adverse balance of trade, silver and gold start flowing out of the country and the country gradually gets impoverished. After the Battle of Plassey, England established monopolistic control over Indian economy. Now situation was reversed and wealth was being drained out of India to England. So, the Battle of Plassey 1757, it gave political power into the hands of the English East India Company, and the English ruthlessly used this political power for extracting the entire amount of resources and the reserves that India had for the betterment of their own economy. So, drain of wealth from India to England started after the Battle of Plassey after 1757, when company acquired political power, and servants of the English East India Company acquired a privileged status through dastak, dastur, nazrana, and private trade. So before the Battle of Plassey 1757, the English East India Company was only a merchant company, a trading company, which was the purpose of which was to trade with India. That is purely economic reasons why the company was constituted. But after Plassey, after 1757, the company got political power and also a privileged status in India through a number of institutions like the dastak, dastur, nazrana, private trade, etc., and the exploitation of Indian economy at the hands of the English East India Company begins right from 1757, and it aggravates by the time we have the Battle of Buxar in 1764, and especially in 1765 when the company acquires the Diwani of Bihar, Bengal, and Orissa. So this was the background of the drain of wealth from India, how actually the drain of wealth began. Now, how was the drain of wealth actually taking place? Profits from oppressive land revenue policy. There were the land revenue policy of the English East India Company, and the manner in which it was extracting profits from this oppressive land revenue policy was clearly evident during this period. Then the company was getting profits from trade. Also, there were exactions made by the company's officials. Then there were private fortunes obtained by company servants through sending of diamonds to Europe and issuing of bills of exchange. So these were basically the methods or the means by which the wealth of India was being drained out of India to England. So this is how the drain of wealth began, through unilateral transfer of funds. Now, this surplus that the company was acquiring was being used for investment for buying Indian goods. So, before India was colonized, it was an exporter of cotton textiles to England. But after the colonization of India, the British rule turned India into an exporter of merely raw materials and an importer of the manufactured goods which were manufactured in England itself. The most affected was Bengal and then Madras and Bombay. Now, this concept of drain of wealth or the drain of wealth theory has been actually given by Dadabhai Naoroji, and his book is called Poverty and Un-British Rule in India. And in fact, he was the first man to say that India's poverty was not due to internal factors but because of the drain of wealth from India by the colonial rule. And he has explained in great detail how wealth was being drained out from India and India was getting impoverished day by day. Britain was draining and bleeding India, and that too for nothing. Now, Noriji specifies how India's one-fourth revenue was going to Britain, which was added to British resources. And he says that if this amount had not been drained, it would have increased India's income. But on the other hand, British rule caused impoverishment and growing impoverishment for the Indian economy. Uh, the causes of external drain, how was the drain of wealth actually taking place? First was through home charges. For example, paying for secretary of state and his establishment at India office in London, plus the pay, pension, training costs, etc. of men who ruled India. So these were known as the home charges, and all these home charges went to England from the resources of India. Then there were annuities on account of railway and irrigation works. Apart from that, pension to retired officials. Apart from that, pension to retired officials was also going from India. The resources of India were being utilized for this. Then there were remittances to England by Europeans to their families. There was military expenditure. So it was in these forms that the resources of India were being drained out to England. Let us talk about the impact of the drain of wealth on Indian economy. Number one, it affected India's prospects of employment and income. When money was sent out of the country, it did not stimulate her trade and industry or reach to the people in any form. So actually, the resources of India were not being utilized for the people of the country, but they were being utilized for financing the costs of British rule. Shortage of capital, industrial development was adversely affected. Industries were not being allowed to grow. Peasants were impoverished. Peasants were gradually getting impoverished. Indian economy was geared up to the needs of the British economy. So Indian economy was being fully and truly exploited to serve the needs of the British economy. Uh, Now we look into the impact of drain theory in the growth of economic nationalism. How Dadabhai Naoroji's drain of wealth theory impacted in the growth of economic nationalism. Now, moderates were the first to develop an economic critique of colonialism. Also, it is important to note that in the first half of the 19th century, Indian intellectuals had a positive attitude towards British rule. They hoped that British would modernize India. But after 1860, there was a disillusionment when Indians saw that the country was regressing and underdeveloping under the British. So realization came after 1860 that they were being exploited. Gradually, they began to look on the darker side of British rule. And it was the nationalist leaders who concluded that the main obstacle to India's economic development is colonialism. And colonialism, which is working through free trade and foreign capital investment. Because, as I already said before, Plassey, there was nothing of the kind of drain of wealth which was taking place from India to England. But after the company got political power into their hands, and the combined and economic and political power of the English East India Company led to a huge drain of wealth, and that continued, and it consequently led to the concept of it also impacted on the nationalists, and they also developed a critique of the Britishers or of the British rule. India was transformed into a supplier of foodstuffs and raw materials to the metropolis, a market for the metropolitan manufacturers, and a field for investment of British capital. So, as I already mentioned, India was an exporter of cotton textiles to Britain before colonization, but after colonization, India was reduced to merely an exporter of raw materials and an importer of the manufactured goods of England. So India was being fully colonized and exploited at the hands of the Britishers. What were the economic demands made by the moderates? They wanted a change in economic policies. They wanted reduction in expenditure and tax, reallocation of military charges, protectionist policy for Indian industries, reduction in land revenue assessment, extension of permanent settlement in Ryotwari and Mahalwari areas, and encouragement to cottage industries and handicrafts. So these were the demands of the economic nationalists and they wanted the Britishers to fulfill these demands. But actually, none of these demands were fulfilled, and the moderate agenda remained largely unrealized. So, we come to the conclusion that India was being fully exploited at the hands of the Britishers, and India's resources, India's wealth, they were being drained out of India on a massive level to finance the costs of British economy, to finance the costs of British rule. And this was one manner in which colonization impoverished the Indian economy to a great extent. So this is about drain of wealth and drain of wealth theory that had a very negative effect on Indian economy. We'll come up with a next video on a similar topic which led to the impoverishment of the Indian economy. So that is all for today. Thank you for watching the video and please subscribe to my channel. Thank you.